Okay, so good afternoon and thank you very much for joining us. Maybe this is a new face for you, some of you today. I'm Lee Hopwood. I'm the CEO at Call Centre Management Association, the CCMA, and welcome to today's online seminar where we'll be asking an expert about the impact of COVID-19 on people policies. Before I introduce you to our expert, Kate, I'd also like to just let you know a little bit more about how the event works and share with you a little bit of the housekeeping. So it's an online seminar, and that means that there is an opportunity for you to ask questions. I'll be posing our experts some questions, but please do feel free to ask some questions in the chat. We have Jane, who is also representing our expert, who will be monitoring those and will be able to answer some of those either in a chat, and we'll hopefully bring some of those into the conversation in a while. Also supporting me is Sarah Hunt, who you will probably know. Sarah is our Director of Membership here at the CCMA, and she will be diving into the call in a moment or two. You will be able to see the panelists. You'll be able to see us throughout today's session. So hopefully that will mean that you can see who's talking and help you engage a little bit more. Please do keep your microphones muted, and this is really about the noise quality. As I say, please do ask questions in the chat area, and we will be recording the session and publishing it on our website and sharing it through social media. So feel free to share this with your colleagues after the event. So first of all, I'd like to introduce you to our expert for the day, and this is Kate Palmer. She is the Associate Director of Advisory at Peninsula. And Kate knows an awful lot about employment law. She knows a lot about all aspects of HR, and is going to take us down a little bit of an advisory and give us lots of help and advice around the impact of COVID on our people policies. Kate.
Hello. Hi.
Hello, and thank you for joining us.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for having me.
And tell us a little bit more about Peninsula and a little bit more about yourself. Yeah,
absolutely. So thanks for the introduction, Lee. I've got a lot to live up to now, so thank you. Yeah, my name's Kate Palmer. I'm the Associate Director here at Peninsula. So to tell you a little bit about Peninsula first, probably is the best way forward. So Peninsula is an employment law, health and safety and HR consultancy firm. We were founded in 1983 by the Dome brothers. You may know them. They are businessmen, probably more renowned in the north. And it started off as a very small consultancy firm, actually. As the tale goes, the Dome brothers owned a betting firm in Salford, would you believe? They are entrepreneurs. They had a tribunal made against them, and they couldn't find appropriate support in the legal field, so they set up their own consultancy firm. They realised there was a gap in the market, so apparently they tossed a coin. One of them got Betfred, and one of them got the employment law consultancy firm. So that's how the tale goes. And we have grown significantly over time, starting off as a very small business, and now we do have offices worldwide in Canada, New Zealand, Australia, obviously the UK and Ireland. And what's at the core of our operation and our delivery is support and advice for primarily SMEs, but we do have a corporate client base as well. Probably 28,000 of our 35,000 clients in Peninsula are SMEs, and we provide anything such as what's the rate of SSP to I'm shutting down my factory of 10,000 staff, and how do I do it? So it's far and wide. We own a wellbeing company as well. So the Peninsula Group has grown significantly, but never been in more demand than it is now, actually, because of the current situation.
Thank you, Kate. And it's interesting. I'm not surprised that you're under a lot of demand. I think there's a lot of queries, a lot of complications that this environment has landed on us. So it'll be great to ask you some of those questions that we've had from members in a moment. But before I do, one of the things that we introduced on an online seminar a few weeks ago was doing a little bit of polling, just to really get an understanding from you, our members. Where are you at? Where are you thinking? Where is this actually having an impact on your businesses and on your people? So Sarah, if you could talk us through, we've got 4 questions. So we'd like you to, everybody to participate if you could. Over to you, Sarah, please.
Great, thank you, Lee. Yes, so as Lee said, we've got 4 questions. I'll bring the first question up in a moment. We'd like you to choose one answer if that's okay. We'll give everybody a couple of seconds to choose their answer, and then we'll tell you the results as well. So just to let you know, the first question is, what percentage of your frontline advisors are now working from home? So is it none? Is it up to 25%, up to 50%, up to 75%, or actually 100% are working from home? So see, a lot of you have already started answering. We're nearly there, just wait a few more seconds for everybody to get a chance to answer. Great, looks like we're there. So here are the results.
Wow. Okay, so the results tell us, for those that are calling in, 5% have said that up to 25% of their frontline advisors are now working from home. 15% suggested that 50% of their advisors are working from home. 28% said up to 75% of advisors are working from home, and 100% of working from home is a massive 51%. What's really interesting, so this was a question that we raised at the seminar a few weeks ago, and back then 60% of frontline advisors were working from home. So it would appear that that maybe some advisors are going back into the office, and so it'll be interesting to touch on that in a moment with Kate.
Yeah, we've certainly seen that more and more, haven't we?
Yeah.
So our next question then is, what percentage of your frontline advisors have been furloughed during the pandemic? Is it none of them, up to 25%, up to 50%, up to 75%, or actually over 75%? Nearly there as well. I'll give it a couple more seconds for everyone to get a chance to answer. Great, there you go. I'll share the results now.
Oh, wow. So the results tell us that for 40% say that no frontline advisors have been furloughed. That's really interesting. Up to 25% is 34. Up to 25% of frontline advisors have been furloughed by 34% of people on the call today. 12% say that up to 50% of their advisors have been furloughed. And this is interesting with all the word percentage. Up to 10% say that up to 75% of their frontline advisors have been furloughed. And over 75% have been furloughed for 4%. So that's really interesting that maybe the number of calls that have been going on in the contact center industry and the amount of interaction that our customers are looking for has resulted in not as much furloughing as some may think. So that's a really interesting result. Thank you, Sarah. Let's go for question 3.
Yeah. Question 3. Have you seen a change to annual leave arrangements due to the pandemic? So our employees are taking little or no annual leave. Our employees have been continuing to take it as normal, and our employees are taking actually more than usual. So again, just give it a couple more seconds. And I think we're there. they're the results.
Great. So this is a question that I'll be asking Kate about, because there's obviously an impact on annual leave for those that have had furloughed staff. But the results are in, and 43% say our employees are taking little or no annual leave. 5% say that employees are taking more annual leave than usual. Not really surprising that that's quite low. And employees are continuing to carry on as normal, to continue to take annual leave during the pandemic is at 51%. So that's interesting. Go on then, give us question 4, Sarah.
Okay. So question 4 is your organisation providing specific support to employees around their well-being during this time? Yes, we have. No, we haven't, and we're not sure. I think there's a front runner on this one.
I wouldn't be surprised if there's a front runner.
Again, just give it a couple more seconds. And I'll just share those results. There you go.
And not a surprise there. 92% of those of you on the call that have answered that question say that yes, you have been giving some specific support to employees around their well-being. 6% say no, we haven't, and that's an interesting result in itself. But do you know what? I think that's where we'll start. So Sarah, thank you very much for those polls. I really appreciate that. And Kate, if I could invite you to join me again. Great. So Kate, let's start there. Let's start with the mental health. It has been a challenge, and it continues to be a challenge, and I'm sure it will be a challenge for some time as we come out of this lockdown and start dealing with this. But what can contact centre managers do to really support their advisors? Can you give us any advice on how we can manage the mental well-being of our advisors? What could we be doing? What should we be doing?
Yeah, of course. I don't know whether other people have made this observation, but I've actually found that the people's seem to be struggling more coming out of lockdown than being in it, in fact, because there's been that period of stability and knowing where things are going, and we're all in our houses. And don't get me wrong, people have struggled with that. Obviously, specific situations have arisen, but now that change is afoot, and yet the pandemic is still in the background, and there's still, unfortunately, people contracting COVID-19, I found that it's now that it's quite prudent. Unfortunately, what I would say is the obvious thing, that the key thing to any support is communication. Whether the employee is furloughed or not furloughed, that really strong, frequent communication from manager to employee, be it via email, be it picking up the phone, giving business updates, making people still feel involved. That has been absolutely fundamental for my team actually as well. I mean, don't forget furloughed. A lot of people think to be furloughed, people will be attracted to that and that it's a good thing. Actually, I found a lot of people have struggled with it, and I made some personal calls to those furloughed and had a really good 20-minute chat with each, and that in itself went down a treat, really. It was very much welcomed, as have emails from our CEO about the business, where we are going, reassuring people of the stability of the jobs. A lot of uncertainty, and to anything you can do with your comms to allay those uncertainties and fears is brilliant. I think furthermore, if you do have an employee assistance programme, that is a fantastic tool to be able to tap into, for someone to be able to pick up the phone and contact a counsellor 24/7 and be able to speak to someone expert on that matter is really key and helpful in the situation. As leaders, as contact centre leaders, as HR practitioners, we are not we are not mental health experts, and there's only so far we can go. So if an individual does need that, that's a key tool. And constant comms, push notification, hints and tips on how to look after oneself, I think are really key in the current climate.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that for some there might be some processes that are already in place, and that they have just been really tested to their limits. I guess for others it's maybe not been a big issue, and this has really helped them introduce some new processes and ways of dealing with situations they may not have seen before. No, that's really interesting. And you touched there on furloughing staff, and obviously today is the last day that people can be furloughed for the first time.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and in particular the impact that has on the advisors that have been furloughed, the advisors that have not been furloughed, but also the impact on the contact centre leaders and how they therefore are going to be able to manage maybe fluctuations in demand going forward, because we're still not out of this yet.
Yeah, absolutely. Furlough, a word that I'd never ever used before the 13th of March, and I think I'm saying in every other sentence now. So I'll take it from the beginning, really. Furlough was introduced, off the top of my head, it was Friday the 13th of March. It sticks in my head because we got a lot of information all at once that we had to dissect. And the scheme as it was introduced and as it currently stands is running from the 1st of March to the 30th of June. And when you are furloughed, you are agreeing to cease all work, and it has to be for a minimum of 3 weeks. And in doing so, the government will contribute an employee's wage of up to 80%, capped at £2,500 per month, plus the employer contribution, pension contributions and NI. So that in its current form is maintained up until the end of July. But changes are afoot then. I'll come on to that in a little while. But you're absolutely right. Today is the last day to be able to put someone in the scheme. If you've not done so by today, you're not going to be able to benefit from the job retention scheme and what that will bring until its closure date at the end of October. If you have furloughed someone to date for a minimum of 3 weeks, they can still be part of the scheme as it moves forward. But if you haven't, you must do today if you want them to be part of the scheme as it proceeds. And the scheme is going to adapt on the 1st of July. It's becoming something called the flexible furlough scheme, just to make it that bit more complicated for us all. But actually it's very beneficial for employers because furlough has limitations. You've got to cease all work. There's no flexibility to it at all. But from the 1st of July, you're going to be able to have, in the Chancellor's words, maximum flexibility. For example, you can work 2 days and come in and the employer pays you, and then the other 3 days you are on the job retention scheme. We're getting further guidance about that on Friday, the 12th of June. We're going to get a big government document that dissects it and gives us some practical answers to how to apply it. But that is going to give us more flexibility if work is picking up, but not to its full extent.
And we've actually had a question in. Will the flexible scheme, will it only be open to employees who have already been furloughed, or will it be open to new applicants? Obviously, the scheme is changing.
Yeah.
Go on, Kate.
So it's open to anyone that's been furloughed to date from the 1st of March up until whenever. You know, if they've been furloughed to date for a minimum of 3 weeks, they can be part of the flexible furlough scheme. If they have not, you have to furlough them today to have that first state of furlough, that minimum 3 weeks for them to be able to benefit from the flexible furlough scheme moving forward. If you don't do that, you will not be able to enter the scheme. However, one caveat to that, what I would say is, yesterday I got asked the question, if I'm on maternity leave and I'm not due to finish that until tomorrow, does that exclude me from the scheme? We in fact got some government guidance through last night to say that if you are currently on maternity, adoption leave, paternity leave, it lists the family-friendly leave entitlements, that you don't have to be furloughed by today to enjoy the scheme. You can actually enter that at a later date. So that, as it stands, is the only caveat to that rule. We await the guidance on Friday, but at least that gives flexibility and probably fairness, I would say, to those returning from a period of family-friendly leave.
Yeah, no, excellent. And you've actually just answered another question that we've had in. So
oh, good. Okay.
Good timing. And obviously, as we're now, things are beginning to change. We are starting to hopefully move into, dare I say, a new normal. And it does mean that furloughed staff are starting to come back in. They're starting to come back to work, and that might be starting to work from home. It might be coming back into the office. When contact centre managers are bringing those people back, what are the key things that they really need to be thinking about? What do they need to consider?
Okay, so technically when you unfurlough someone, technically you could ring them up now and go, I want you in an hour. But you've also got an important and key employment relationship in the mix here, and all the worries and context and childcare issues that the situation has brought. So the first thing I would say is if you were going to unfurlough someone, think about their context and give them reasonable notice. Myself, for example, I'd have to sort out 2 kids. So you know, think about the person's individual circumstance and give them reasonable notice of that. That's a good start to the unfurloughing process. Secondly, if they are either returning to home working or the workplace, think about any changes that have happened. Do you have to update them on certain things to allow them to hit the ground running? Because that's what they'll want to do. They'll want to come in and get back on with it. You know, importantly, if they're coming back into the office, there's so much more to consider with that. You know, if you've put in health and safety measures in line with the COVID-19 secure guidelines, looking out here now, arrows on the floor, sanitizer everywhere, one-way stair systems, entry points closed off. You need to educate the person on that in advance of their return. And also allay any fears. People are worried about walking back in a workplace like this. It would 12 weeks lockdown. Show them a video of the workplace, send them some photos, demonstrate the effort that you've put in to ensure for their safety as much as possible, and make that communication as strong as possible. And then an audit trail, confirm the unfurloughing in writing, get that on the P file. And that's a good starting point, really. They're the first pointers to think about.
And I guess, so one of the questions that we've had in is if someone has been furloughed for the minimum of 3 weeks, and then they come back to work, but then they need to be furloughed again, does that second furlough have to be a minimum of 3 weeks? Or I think you mentioned earlier, it could be a couple of days.
Yeah, it can be. As it stands, unfortunately, as has been the case throughout this period, that it seems that the government have given a briefing and an announcement in its vaguest forms and then said we'll publish the guidance in a week. So we do await the guidance on Friday, but it's not for the minimum of 3 weeks anymore, because it allows for that maximum flexibility. So as we read it, based on the information you've been given, you could literally come in for half an hour if you wanted, and then be furloughed for the other 37 hours of your working week. That's the way it's been portrayed. We await Friday's guidance to confirm that, because obviously that ceasing work for a full 3 weeks has been quite restrictive in its nature and hasn't allowed for peaks and troughs of work. So await Friday, but the minimum of 3 weeks is gone essentially.
And I guess that may answer a couple of the other questions that we've had in. One is around childcare. If flexible working has been accommodated due to childcare, does this still have a 12-week limit before it becomes contractual?
The 12-week limit actually isn't anything in law, to be honest. The way I take that question is someone has been working for a period and they think then it becomes contractual because of the way it's worked in practice. There isn't any limit in law for something that's happening in practice to become contractual. It's all about regularity and nature of the business and business context. So that doesn't actually stand in terms of law. What I would say is that obviously, and I'm sure you're coming on to this, Lee, but the flexible working process is a statutory right, right to request flexible working in its own nature. And I think not the fear, that's the wrong word, but the question some employers have is if they can show that they can practice flexibility with the job retention scheme, does that negate one's ability to refuse a flexible working request if down the line it doesn't suit business needs? I hope that makes sense. So 12 weeks doesn't apply, but I think in demonstrating you can show flexibility with the flexible furlough scheme, it may lead to an argument that this can be maintained.
Yes. So I've got one more question that's come in from our audience.
Yeah.
Before I ask you about flexible working.
Sorry.
Because I think there's that's going to be really interesting to hear what you have to say on that. So the question is, what about employees on long-term absence? And we missed the cut-off point of the 10th of June today. Can they be added at a later date in order to fit, if fit to return to work? Sorry. Can they be added at a later date if fit to return to work?
Yeah, so as it stands, we have not been given any direction from the government that you can be entered into the scheme if you've been off sick and not furloughed by this point. What you could do if you wanted to today, and you'd have to move quickly, if someone was on long-term sick, you could agree with that employee to mutate that sickness absence into furlough with mutual agreement, and then you could enter them into the scheme today. But bear in mind, think of the context. That might fit the here and now, but is that going to fit you? Is that going to suit you down the line? You could very well be knee-jerk because you've got to do that today. But if you don't do it today, likewise, they won't be able, as it stands, based on government guidance, to enter the scheme from here on.
And what about if there is when you're looking to bring people back to work, you want to, whether it's bringing them back to work from home or bringing them back to work in the office, what do you do if they refuse?
It's really difficult terrain to navigate this, I have to admit, Lee. It's all about the reasonableness of that refusal, and each situation will be very much assessed on its own merits. So the first thing, if someone says, I am not coming back, the obvious question there is why? And a really decent, for want of a better phrase, conversation between employer and employee about the reason why. And it's very contextual. If, you know, they literally do not have childcare, or you know, they are in a vulnerable category, their refusal may very well be reasonable. It's where it mutates into, I'm just not coming in, and you feel that actually their refusal is obstructive and unreasonable. And we have had situations where businesses have therefore proceeded to disciplinary on those grounds. But it's a very sensitive issue, that, and obviously as an employer and employee in this situation, you want to avoid that where you can. But unfortunately, in some scenarios, it has transitioned into such. But before you do anything, exhaust all options.
Yeah, and it's interesting, I guess, and this leads on to another question that we've had. If you do bring someone back really reluctantly, then it could see an increase in absence. The actual question that we've had is, as we are seeing more employees return to work, there may be an increase of intermittent absence due to COVID. So where do we stand with our current absence management process?
It's a very good question. As it stands, I'm giving you the legalistic stance here, not the people-focused stance. I think they're very distinct in their nature. As it stands, in terms of risk, COVID-19 and the symptoms of such are not covered under the Equality Act. They are not deemed as a disability. Now, don't get me wrong, you may contract COVID-19 and be more at risk of contracting COVID-19 because of a protected characteristic. So you've got to be very mindful of that. So at its base point and its most simplistic point, you could still include them as part of a disciplinary process. However, I would advise to very much tread with caution. From a people perspective, a PR perspective, a fairness perspective, I think you'd be treading on thin ice if you were disciplining someone because they had contracted COVID-19 or were having to self-isolate because of symptoms. I probably wouldn't go there. But some employers are choosing a more commercial route, but I think that's it's very close to the bone, shall we say.
And I guess that's, is that why having the flexible furloughing may well be a way of backup, so that if someone is off sick with COVID, then you can bring someone else in that's maybe been on flexible?
Absolutely, absolutely. And there's also the SSP regulations have been amended as well. I suppose this is a bit of a tangent, Lee, but if someone is self-isolating because they have been told to, recommended by the government to do so, you've got the option of working from home if you're able to. You've got the option of some other agreed form of leave. You've also got the option of putting them on SSP, even though they might not be diagnosed with COVID-19 and self-isolating, not officially sick. That does attract SSP. The regulations were amended to such. So there's various ways that absence could be categorised. And officially, self-isolation with no symptoms officially isn't sickness. It's another type of absence, because you're not sick. You're being told by the government to stay at home. So it's if you're thinking of disciplining someone for such absences, I would be seeking advice. It's not simplistic.
Yes. No. Okay. And I'm now going to start asking you about flexible working.
Okay.
So and it does lead into a question that we've had in from one of our audience members. So obviously, at the start of the pandemic, there was a big migration to home working, and for all of the right reasons. Not everybody went to home working, clearly, as our poll suggests, but there was. And there is now a feeling, and when I'm talking to some of our members, there is a feeling that actually not all advisors will come back into the office, and that there is more of a push towards more of that flexible working environment, and flexible working, rather than it being you are a home worker or you're not, it's kind of recognizing that that just being a home worker may not be right for everybody. Some people want that face-to-face interaction that I know that we're all craving at the moment. So I can see organisations' policies moving towards a more flexible working process. However, it's going to take time to get there. So I'll come on to the how do we get there in a moment, but the question that's been asked is, we haven't furloughed and have all colleagues working from home.
Yep.
But what should we do if we ask colleagues to come back to work on site when it's safe to do so, and they want to continue to work from home full time, but it's outside of our current flexible working policies?
Okay. If in those circumstances, those individuals used to all work from the office, they are contractually obliged as it stands to work from the office. So you'd be very much within reason, and it would be appropriate to ask them to come back. However, what you may well get is, and I don't think what you may well get, what you will get, I suspect, is a flurry of requests for flexible working. Now, every individual with 26 weeks service has the statutory right to make a request for flexible working. And when they do that, you have to follow a process in terms of having a meeting, listening to what they've got to say, and so forth, and then arriving at an outcome. Now, that's probably the challenging bit in terms of arriving at the outcome now. Certainly, not challenging for those that want to say, yeah, work from home. And I really do believe many employers' mindsets will have transitioned to that because of the quick pace we've had to do this, and they've seen the benefits of it with a forced situation. So I think a lot will agree. But for those that want to refuse, the challenge is you've shown it can work, or maybe shown that it can't. So I think that the actual decision, whether you're agreeing to it or you're refusing to it, certainly the refusal becomes a little bit more complicated, because there are 8 statutory reasons on which you can refuse a request for flexible work, such as additional pressure on colleagues, not in line with business needs. There's various reasons, and it becomes a little trickier to refuse because you've shown you can do it. Unless, of course, it's shown that you can. It depends on the context. So that's what I suspect it will evolve to. As it stands, they're contractually obliged to work in the office. They can ask them, give them a reasonable management instruction to do so, or not, as the case may be, an assessed model. But I suspect then you'll get a flurry of requests.
Yes. And with everybody coming back into, slowly coming back into the office, we touched on it earlier about, like you say, the markings on the floor, stay 2 meters away. And in creating that environment, that safe environment. Now, I know that you're not a health and safety law expert, but as employers have a duty to create a safe working environment, and that's where the Working Safely guidance that came out a few weeks ago was really based on. And there have been challenges around how do you sort the toilets? How do you create those safe environments? And before I come on to a question from one of our audience members, what are the concerns that you've seen being raised around having that safe working environment? And what advice are you giving around that at the moment?
Yeah, I think that in its simplistic form, the concern is just about the spread of the virus, irrespective of what measures you've put in. I mean, you know, you've got all brilliant I have to say, actually, that the COVID-19 secure guidelines, which the government published, if you are an office-based workplace, which I assume most people on here are, have a read of it. It's pretty clear. It's very good and it's very practical. It's about 16 pages long. Even if you've done all that, some people are just still fearful, especially when, you know, you see on the news that unfortunately 200 people, I think around that figure, passed away yesterday. It's about allaying those concerns, allaying those fears. And when you get in the office, I would say you become a little bit relaxed. I can talk from my own personal perspective. One of my colleagues said, "Do you want a water?" And I said, "Please, yeah." And then I said, "No, don't get me a water. It's not a good thing to do. Don't get me a water. Don't go to the co-op for me. Don't answer my phone when it rings." Once people are in, you've got to lead by example, because your behaviours can very quickly change. You can just go back to normal. And I've had to pull people going the wrong way around the one-way system. And I've had to tell people, you know, to only one person in the kitchen at a time. My point being that as leaders, as contact centre leaders, show you're on high alert. If people are going too close together, nip it in the bud. If too many people have jumped in the lift, stop it. And demonstrate that actually the sensible approach to 2 metre distancing is being policed as much as you possibly can.
Yeah, and it's interesting. We here at the CCMA, we were involved in supporting the creation of the guidance for the working safety guidance with the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy. And we got sight of that guidance early and spoke to a number of our members to be able to pull together some things, some feedback for the government. And since it's been released, what I'm hearing is that that guidance is a base level. Obviously, it's guidance. It's not law. But it is a base level. I'm hearing people are going way up above and beyond that level in order to protect their people, recognising the importance of that. And staying with that, looking after your people, the question that we've had so there's the health and safety factor in the office, but what about for those that are working from home and maybe they've got the flexible working, that's a new policy that's coming, they are now working from home. The question is, what are our responsibilities in regards to things like workstation assessments for home workers? Is that something you feel comfortable answering?
It is I'll give you my view, but I can't go into too great a detail because I'd be giving you advice when I'm not qualified to do so, and that would be remiss of me. What I certainly would say, though, obviously I'm in liaison with our health and safety director a lot because of this very situation, and certainly with that quick turnaround of and our obligation to get people home, there was an acceptance that things couldn't be done in a perfect way. So the risk assessments, you know, your workstation setup and all that stuff that normally we would do in the office, there was a relaxation of it on the agreement that that the pressing need of getting people home overcomes everything else. But now, and I in fact spoke to our health and safety director, Russell, the other day, they're planning, because we cannot have our whole population back in the office. We're going to be probably about 60%. We can't maintain 2 metre social distancing with 100% population. So now they're working on a project actually of doing all the usual stuff we would do for an office-based staff member at home. For those that are going to remain at home, we now have to become more stringent because it's becoming a more permanent fixture. And I envisage, quite honestly, until we get a vaccine, and I know as much as you guys on here on this, but until we get a vaccine, I can't see that position changing. So now is the time, if you have home workers, based on what our health and safety director has told me, to start moving on, being more stringent on risk assessments and workspace setups and so forth. What device are people working on? They got the back crooks over on a little Apple computer. All that stuff we would normally do now needs to start being done.
So do you know what, that leads beautifully into another question that we've been asked. So that's all dead easy, as she says. It's not that easy, but it's easier when someone is in the environment that they've become used to, and that they are working in the same place the whole time. But what about if you've got a request from someone to be even more flexible in their working location? So what happens if they don't always want to be working at home in their back bedroom? They might decide one day it's the back bedroom, another day they're going to work because they're on holiday. Just thinking about that longer term flexibility. So the question we've had in, just mindful of that, the question we've got is, I am interested to know, what is the opinion about people's request to work from other remote locations, i.e. have family abroad and wants to travel and work from a different country? Also, people wanting to link holidays with working remotely, normally from abroad. What's your thoughts
I mean,
on that?
From two aspects to this. Obviously, the employment law one, it's very much dependent on whether you want to agree to that flexibility and if it works for your business. You know, from a technological point of view, does it work? From an efficiency point of view, from a productivity, you know, all them considerations as to whether you want to agree to it. From a contractual point of view, I wouldn't venture into the health and safety elements of that, Lee, because quite frankly, it gives me the heebie-jeebies. I think that opens up a lot of complexities. But quite rightly, if someone is working from a beach, you are still under a legal obligation, if you have agreed that they can do so, to protect for their health and safety. So I think that becomes complicated. But I wouldn't like to say what you should do with regard to a risk assessment, whether I doubt one could even be done.
Well, exactly. It does, and maybe that's the direction of travel that the government needs to look at. Is maybe some of the responsibility shouldn't always lie on the employer, but it's certainly one of the areas that, as I say, us talking to the government, we are trying to encourage them to open their eyes to look at how the working environment has changed, and how we can make sure that we're protecting both contact centre organisations and their responsibilities, as well as the people working for us. And it does beg the question, and we touched on it earlier in the meeting, around annual leave. So what is the situation with annual leave? Because people are building up annual leave, whether they've been furloughed, whether actually they're enjoying working from home, and don't yet feel like they have a need for annual leave because they haven't got the big commute, and they're being able to spend more time with family. And so what's the situation there? What's the impact of that? And will they be able to take any time in accordance with their employment policies? Tell us a little bit more about that.
So annual leave as a minimum per employee, we are entitled in the UK to 5.6 working weeks, which can encompass bank holidays as well. Most employers give more than that, but that is the minimum. Sorry to get boring on you, but that 5.6 weeks is broken up into two elements, 4 weeks of which are derived from Europe, from the EU, and 1.6 weeks are derived from UK legislation. And pre-beginning of March, the only element you were permitted to carry over to the next annual leave year under the working time regulations was that additional 1.6 working weeks. The legislation was changed earlier in the year because of the pandemic, and the legislation has been changed to say one is able to carry over their full annual leave entitlement into the next two subsequent annual leave years. But if it hasn't been reasonably practicable to take it during the pandemic. And that's the real key to this. I envisage most contact centre practitioners, certainly myself, I've been very much within, I've been able, I've not wanted to, but I've been able to take annual leave during this period. Reasonably practicable or not being, there's a list that the government have produced. I think there's around 8 points that fall into that category, but it's generally where someone has a nurse, for example, where you have under no circumstances been able to take leave because you've been needed. So firstly, in terms of that carryover, you assess the practicalness, if even a word, of taking the leave and whether it would fall under that legislation. For the bulk of us, I envisage we've been able to take it. Now, as an individual, I can say I've not had an annual leave day since February. So I better hurry up. Basically, I've got until the end of the year to take a good bulk of annual leave, and I'm being encouraged by my employer to do so, because if I don't, in our circumstances, in my position, I will lose it. But that's something that you as employers have to decide. You are able to allow your staff to take the additional to 4 weeks over if you so wish them to do so. Look what's in your current contracts with regards to that. Do you want to adapt it? You may still wish to do so. Or the alternative is, do you want to enforce people to take leave? Because you can, under the working time regs, if someone isn't taking it and not agreeing to book it, you can actually enforce annual leave by giving double the amount of notice of the period of leave they wish to take. So you could give me 2 weeks notice to take a week's leave, and I'd have to take it. Let's not forget, the working time regulations is a piece of health and safety legislation. The reason we have annual leave is to ensure we get the appropriate breaks and ensure for our well-being. So we want people to take leave, and it's important that we get that happening via whatever route you decide to take: encouragement, enforcement, carry it over, whichever. That's at the heart of it. And I can only speak from personal experience. I need a break.
Yeah.
You know, and I've booked time in now on the premise, I know I need a break, and that's what we need to be encouraging individuals to do.
And I guess that's that's something that those that have not been taking time off simply because they've felt that they didn't need to, I guess there could be an influx of holiday requests, and I think that what you've talked about there answers one of the questions that we have. But with annual leave, if people are starting to take annual leave, book their holidays, and traveling abroad. So the question that we have is, are we obligated to allow employees to work from home on return to allow them to self-isolate?
Hello?
No, you're not obliged to do that. You're not obliged to do that at all. I think the first thing, just to explain, I'm sure you've all seen it on the news, but the new quarantine rules came into effect Monday gone on the 8th of June, and anyone flying into the UK from abroad, with some exemptions, such as medical professionals and Ireland and Channel Islands, Isle of Man and so forth, you have to self-isolate for 14 days on your return, but you're not obliged to allow the individual to work from home. You might want to consider, if that's to your benefit, you might want to take a few steps backwards and consider whether you want to permit the period, knowing that someone's going to go away for 2 weeks and have to have 4 weeks off. You know, there's probably a bit of pre-thought to do before you approve the holiday. But in answer to the question, you're not obliged.
Yes. So I'm going to move on to this thing called the Test and Trace program. And obviously we're aware that it was tested before. There's been a lot of feedback into the government about it. And there's the contact tracing app. Who knows when that might become available. But we do know that this Test and Trace program is underway, and it is clearly a big topic of debate. What do contact centre leaders need to be aware of with this new app and the program behind it? How can they protect their workforce with this?
Yeah, I think just to explain how it's working, if someone is diagnosed with COVID-19, then it's a test and trace program, and as part of the program, they have to inform program representative, for want of a better phrase, who they've been in contact with, and those individuals will be contacted and asked to self-isolate for 14 days. That for me has a risk factor when people are returning to the workplace, because it depends what being in contact means. Is it on the same floor? Is it having walked past someone on a corridor? Is it being 2 meters apart? We don't quite know what that means yet. That has a risk factor in that if it is a floor, that's this whole team of the minimal amount that have returned going home. So it's something to be very mindful of, and something which may influence how rapid you bring people back to, how quickly you bring people back to the office is what I would say. Taking it on a step further, in a similar vein to obligations when someone returns from abroad, if someone is asked to self-isolate having been contacted on the test and trace program, they self-isolate and they do attract SSP. but considerations again about whether you want that individual to homework, whether they have a period of annual leave, whether they go onto SSP, lots of considerations in that regard. The important point to avoid that happening and people being asked to self-isolate is just be as sensible as possible in the workplace, and individuals out there. Hand washing, 2 meters, all the things we're getting told all the time.
Yeah, no, I agree, and I'm conscious of time. We're just coming up to 5 to the hour. So one last piece of advice: is there a particular piece of advice that you would really like to share with our contact centre managers today?
Calmness, I would say, and I'll stick another one in there, Lee. Actually, opportunity. I've seen panic, and understandably so. But our job as leaders, and we have our own worries, you know, we have to offload them on someone. Make sure you've got someone you can do that to. But as contact centre leaders trying to get our teams through this situation, show calmness, really clear communication, support. It's so key. The words you're exchanging with your team now, for me, take away employment law, take all that aside. The human in us and our resilience and the way we convey ourselves are really key. For me, certainly, I think that's so important. But secondly, I would say is opportunity. It's horrible what's happened. You know, sometimes you wake up in the morning and you think, is this a dream? It's just horrible, isn't it? But we've identified opportunity, and I'm sure businesses, certainly our clients, have adapted the way we operate. We're doing a lot more things digitally like this. I'm sure many people are, but our service delivery, a lot more digital service delivery, and we don't intend to go backwards. So that would be my second point. At some point, give yourself a day, sit down and think of everything you've encountered throughout this period and how you can improve your business from it, because there are opportunities.
Yeah, no, thank you very much, Kate. And before everybody disappears, I just want to say a huge thank you to you, Kate, for joining us today. I really appreciate that. And thank you, everybody, for your questions. This is obviously one of our first real Ask the Experts type of online seminar, and I hope you've enjoyed it. Just as a little reminder, there are some resources available on the CCMA website that you may find useful. There is the coronavirus page, and there's some great guidance in there, some great opportunities to get up to speed on government guidance and so forth, and we're continuing to share information through there. But we've also got coming up the Future of Retailing contact centres on the 24th of June with our partners 8x8, and we're always doing special interest group round tables. So do take a look at, have a chat with Sarah around those groups if you're not already involved in those. But please also have a look at what you can go back and look at. So there is a podcast specifically looking at the impact of COVID on recruitment, and that was with Merge, and that's a really good listen. We have done a BT in Newcastle member visit, and you can go and watch that. And there's also an online seminar that you can listen to about transitioning out of the crisis. So there's some other resources that you can tap into. So thank you, Kate. Thank you, Peninsula. Thank you, Jane and Sarah, for helping us through this. And one final point of note is that the CCMA supports the European Contact Centre and Customer Service Awards. They are open right now for entry. And there are a number of new categories in particular. There are 5 categories that are all looking at responding in a crisis, and I would encourage you to have a look at those. It is a real opportunity to thank your teams and thank those that have supported you this year. So please do take a look at that, www.exa.com. So thank you very much, and I do hope you'll join us again on one of our online seminars, and we'll speak to you soon. All the best. Have a good rest of the day.